You know that feeling when you're walking home alone at night? Do you also keep your key tight in your hands? It's surprising how much the design of our cities play into this feeling of fear.
So, hello and welcome to another episode on Design to Connect. For anyone who is new here in Design to Connect, we talk about the world of cities and design and architecture and how cities of today are impacting us and how, with a little bit of changes in how we design the cities, about the policy of the cities and the culture within our cities, we can actually live happier and healthier in where we are living. So, in today's episode and the next couple of episodes to come, we are not anymore talking to a specific individual about their personal journeys, but we are talking to a group of people who are working on a specific project. And I'm sure that today's topic is something that would be relatable to a lot of you, either you're a designer or not. Today, we're going to talk about the walkability of women and safety of women in cities with a focus on Milan and really dive into the challenges and experiences of women living in cities. So, the project that we are going to think about and talk about, and the research project is called StepUp and is funded by Fondazione Cariplo in collaboration with Temalab, Università delle Studi di Napoli Federico II, Sex and the City, and WAC 21 Foundation. And what this project is really trying to do is to identify and understand and kind of analyze the challenging areas in the neighborhoods of Milan and develop policy recommendations to kind of enhance and improve the level of walkability and safety of women in cities around the world. So here I have with me Lily and Lamia. How are you both?
Good to be here.
Great. Okay, so I talked a lot, so I would let you both introduce yourself and tell us about what you're doing, what is your role within the project, and yeah, just tell us about you.
All right. Should I start, Lily?
Yep.
All right. So first off, just a small clarification. So Lily and I both work at Transform Transport, which is a research foundation focused on issues of mobility in the city, whether it's sustainable mobility or inclusive mobility is also a big part of what we do, and this is a big part of what the project that we're going to talk about today. So the consortium of the project is made up of Transform Transport and Università Federico II, as well as Sex and the City and Walk 21. So it's a big group of people working on this project. But anyway, a bit about me. So as I said, I'm a researcher working on issues of mobility and urban planning in the city. I'm an architect by background, and I also have experience in participatory urban design processes in my home city of Cairo in Egypt. So my research interests are around issues of spatial equity in cities. And so, in particular, the issue of gender, which was the focus of my master's thesis, but also still a big part of what I do today. That's a brief introduction of where I am.
Great. Thank you, Lamia. Lily?
So hi, I'm Lily. I'm a junior researcher at Transform Transport, and as Lamia said, it's a new non-profit foundation, and I started working here exactly for the project, the StepUp project. My background is in engineering and architecture. However, I'm about to finish a master's on the gendered city, which is in urban planning. I worked for 2 years in transport consulting before starting as a researcher. And my interest in gender studies actually starts outside of university, so through book clubs and outside of academia, let's say. However, it's been great to be able to kind of like get the two things together in my master's and in this research project. I think it's very interesting to get two different disciplines to actually merge, and it gives you a chance of tackling problems that you wouldn't have thought of beforehand, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you both. Really happy to have you both on this episode. So I wanted to really start with talking about your own personal journeys. Of course, you're two researchers that are working on this topic, and trying to come up with scientific and policy solutions to the issue that we are facing as women in cities. But I really wanted to ask you about your own personal experiences also, both walking and living in Milan and walking and living in the cities that you were born in. And how has your experiences been different in the city where you were from and Milan? And also if there has been any personal experience that made you to be more passionate, about working on gender and mobility and trying to make safer cities for women when it comes also to walkability.
All right. A lot to unpack, but I'll try to focus on each point. So first off, you asked about living, working, and walking in Milano. So in my experience, I personally have had a positive experience overall. I've been living in Milan for 7 years. And I would say that in terms of safety, because this is the element that we're focused on also in this research project, I have had an overall positive experience. But it's important to remember that this also depends on your lifestyle. It depends on where you are in the city, where you live, where you go to work, at what hour. So there are many factors that really influence how safe you feel. So my lifestyle is a bit more, I'm not really a night person, for example. So, for example, this element doesn't impact me, but the idea is that safety in walking has to be around the clock in every area of the city. So it has to be equal in this sense, both spatially and in terms of time. You have people who work night shifts, or also, for example, and they also have to feel safe walking at home from transport stops or to work. So it really depends on a lot of factors, but for sure, all of us have strategies that we put into place to make ourselves feel safer, right? So this is also another aspect that maybe we don't even realize it today because we've been doing it for so long. But I would personally maybe avoid certain areas that feel more deserted or don't feel as safe or active for a number of reasons. So that's also something that we need to look at. It's not just how we feel in what we're doing, but what we're doing actually to kind of feel safe, because some of it is we're canceling out experiences to make ourselves feel safer, and this is also important. Going back to my hometown, so I have like kind of a group answer for your question about how I felt walking in my hometown, as well as what drove me to be interested in this topic. So basically, as I mentioned before, my master's thesis was focused on the issue of gender inequality in public space. And this is in big part influenced by my experiences living back home in Cairo. Cairo is, of course, a completely different city to Milan. I mean, it's a 20 million population city, which is, of course, incomparable with Milan in terms of all the elements that, you know, make you feel safe change, because you're talking about really a mega city in which there are so many different factors, different layers, cultural layers also that come into place. So definitely growing up, I felt that my mobility was restricted in a large part, especially in walking, because of how I'm perceived on the street. And of course, there are many complex issues that have an impact on this issue. But it's important always to ask who owns the street in a way. Because, so thinking about this question, it's really sometimes the issue is not just in factors. It's not just in like there's a bush there that someone could be hiding behind, or the lighting isn't well, but it's really more of a social complex dilemma in which, because of how society functions and the relationships between people of different backgrounds, there is a certain sense that you get walking on the street of, is this my place or not? Was this place intended for me or not? And this is, so it's a deeper, let's say, a complex issue, not to get deeper into detail, but this is exactly what drove me to be interested in this topic and to try to understand, as architects, as urban planners, what we can actually do, if there's something that we can do to address this issue, and most importantly, to bring it to light.
Thank you. What about you, Lily?
Well, I mean, I completely agree with what Lamia was saying about how the perception of safety differs on so many different factors and levels. And I have been working in Milan, and I don't know it as much as someone who lives in it, because I have been for long periods of time, but not so long as I can have like I don't think a complete opinion on it. But something that hit me was because in Milan I travel by metro, so obviously it's kind of like a different experience based on the mobility and the transportation mode that you're using. So I'll start with my hometown and try to get to Milan, actually, because having grown up in Rome, it was a completely different experience for me, and always having access actually to a private transport made it so much I want to say easier on a safety perception level, because I wasn't really aware of many issues due to the fact that I didn't use public transport or walk at all, because I live in a residential area. There was always the need to move outside. So the walkability issue and also public transport hadn't hit me. And I would recognize a sense of kind of like injustice regarding the freedom to move, but I wasn't able to pinpoint it. So in the meantime, I was studying architecture and I was studying urban planning, and it was incredible, because that is not how I got to kind of like to that realization. I did a year in Erasmus in Paris, and that's really where I kind of like got first impact of how it was to like feel very much aware of yourself, like in the city, and because I am kind of like a night person, and so by walking and moving at night, I got kind of like my first avoiding certain areas and moving based on where I knew like open pubs were, so that I knew I would like intercept people on my way back to my house. It was very different, obviously, and it's so this connection between a difference in how people move in the city, and how this is determined by individual characteristics such as gender, but also many others. came from my experience outside of my hometown, and also through other, as I said, like reading literature, reading feminist literature. And it really got me thinking about also how academia works, like, because in my course, which is architecture and engineering, there is no such thing as gender studies, or even just mentioning the fact that we would study 20 male architects and like 1 woman architect in the whole of a year. So yeah, this is something that I got to understand afterwards, which kind of annoyed me, because I think like, okay, I think I'm quite aware now, obviously, but I sometimes am surprised of how unaware you can be, and how also you kind of have to look outside of maybe the traditional kind of like sets that you're given to have a complete idea of what's going on. As for personal incidents, I consider myself to be quite lucky, to be honest. But I think as many people, many women, you always kind of have had situations where you might have had incidents, and when they happen, usually it's always about, what were you doing walking home alone at night, and what were you doing walking on the beach alone, and that's also something that when you're a kid, or when you're younger anyway, you don't realize how wrong that is, and like how actually it should be the other way around. So not, putting the responsibility on yourself, but actually putting it on whoever is creating that risk.
Yeah, that's actually, I'm thinking, so this is really close to, that's the question I was trying to ask about, who owns the street? And that's the thing, when you victim blame, you're basically saying you shouldn't have been there. And so the street actually belongs to someone else. And that person controls where you go, how you move, what time, what you're wearing, and all of these, related questions. So yeah, I agree with you. And it's interesting to see how also, so across countries, across cities, this question persists, even if it's asked in different ways, even if it's in different varying degrees, but it's really a global question that whoever you speak to in any country, it always plays a factor into how women experience cities.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I think you're kind of pushed to accept the situation and not wanting to question it or, change it in any way. Because I also remember that, like, yeah, when I was studying architecture, and one night I was coming back around 4 a.m. in the morning, because that's when you finish. And, my man colleagues, went home and nothing happened to them. And I was coming back with the 90 bus home, and we know 90 bus. And I had a really uncomfortable experience. And the day after, when I told to my guy colleagues, and I was telling them, and I was crying because, I was feeling really still traumatized from what happened. And they started calling me dramatic. And, in that moment, being young, you accept that, yeah, I am the problem. Why am I acting so dramatic? This wasn't anything. I should just accept it. This is normal, to happen to any woman. Or you are going to be questioned that, what were you wearing? Why were you outside? So we are always pushed to accept the situation, not question it, not talk about it. And yeah, it's just frustrating.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I'm also curious to know, what were the experiences that some of the women that you did, because you launched the survey, and I guess you got so many information coming from the survey. I'm curious to know, what were some of the experiences that other women or people from other genders had in the cities, that maybe you haven't had experienced, and it was kind of new to you and interesting for you to read it.
So we're still in the process of going through the survey results. So far, we've focused more on their mentions of which areas they felt unsafe in. So Lily, I don't know if you have maybe some inputs about incidents and experiences from the survey results, but I think we hadn't yet got to this point, although I agree it's definitely one of the most interesting factors. But looking at like just also how people evaluate different spaces, different areas across the city. Actually, the focus more also, I would say, of the survey is on which elements of the space, of the public space that you're walking in, either increase or decrease your sense of safety, rather than trying to focus on specific incidents or specific events that happened in the past. Because going back to the project, the issue is really about the perception of safety, let's say, and we're trying really to understand like which elements have a bigger impact on people of different genders, so not just women, men, anything else. So really it's the results are still I don't want to go into results yet because we're still at the very beginning of the process, but just understanding also where people feel safe and seeing that there are areas that are quite mentioned, like specific areas that are heavily mentioned by people of different backgrounds, not just gender but also other factors. Has been interesting. Lily, do you have any more insights on the on the survey?
Well, first, I mean, the question of the approach not being just about gender but like intersectional is very kind of like key for us. We have been looking at results and about the areas, as Lamia was saying, and we have a big, to the question, where is a place where you feel safe in Milan? There's a big nowhere, like at the top of the list, like everyone's. But apart from that, I was just looking through a few results about harassment, and only like 21% of people say that they had no harassment like issues in the city of Milan. And we're talking, so obviously all the other respondents had at least one experience, which is something that I guess doesn't even surprise anymore, but I think it should. But anyway, yes, apart from that, we are concentrating on like it's very important to talk about the difficulties and like also harassment and violence and aggressions. However, as StepUp is progressing, the idea is we are very, very interested in not mapping like bad zones, because as we know, the perception of safety of an area will then increase. It's the fact that it is unsafe, because obviously what the feeling of seeing on a map like these areas are perceived as unsafe, then my direct reaction will be, well, I won't go there. So obviously we don't want that to happen. It's very hard because obviously we are mapping areas that, you know, where people are talking of feeling unsafe or also feeling safe. But that's also the point. We're just trying to, basically, the point will be to try to understand the relevance of certain factors. And they will be positive or negative, obviously. Lots of them, the negative ones are easier, I guess, to identify. But yes, like Lamia was saying, we're concentrating on elements that make a space safe or unsafe, at least feel safe or unsafe. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that makes sense. If you want to take a step towards changing things, that would be the first thing, of course, to look at. But so 79% of people in Milan have gone through some kind of bad experience. And this is Milan, like as Lamia was saying, in places like Cairo or where I come from, like in Iran, the situation is much worse. So for a city like Milan that is relatively safer than a lot of other places on earth, 79%, I would say, is a big number. But I'm also curious to know about the impact of this maybe feeling of not safety of women in the city, because we might have some men listeners that would say that, okay, this issue is not directly affecting me, so why should I care about it? But we know that the safety of women, or the feeling of safety of women, or their ability to, easily and safely walk in their cities, doesn't only affect women, but the society as a whole. Of course, that only affecting women or other genders should be enough, reason for it to be addressed. But I'm curious to know how this issue could affect the society as a whole, the productivity of the society, or any other impacts that it could have on everyone.
Yeah. So I would start with the concept of mobility as a right. So of course, there are many productive outcomes of having a more gender equal society. For sure, it affects, for example, women's access to labor. If they're not able to comfortably move around the city, this limits their ability to participate in the labor force and so many other things. However, I think the first point to consider is the issue of mobility as a right. So even if it's not productive, even if it doesn't change, the GDP of the country, it's still from a rights-based perspective, it's very important. And when we talk about women, especially, we're talking about half the population. We're not talking about, even if we're talking about a small population. But this is just to say that this topic has been long overlooked, really, when it's really like, it's really surprising, as we were saying, like it's not even a marginal issue. And it's something that, as Lily was saying, should have been introduced in academia long ago. I mean, the fact that Lily is in a course about gender cities, this makes me so happy. This wasn't even an option when I was at university. And this is already like a great step. But going back to your point, so the effect on society. So from a rights-based perspective, I'll give a like benign example, and not maybe so related to urban planning. But for example, you know how with cars and car manufacturers, the way the seat belt and the what's it called, the airbag are designed, and the whole like safety mechanism is designed based on a male adult body. So this is something also. So this just really gives you an idea of how everything, and this is the same with cities, everything is based on this standard norm that they consider the norm, which is a male adult. And of course, you lose everything else in between. This is like a direct safety issue, let's say. This is about physical safety, but there are so many examples from how we design the city related to perception of safety, and related to safety from harassment, and safety from gender-based violence, that could be addressed, but are really just not addressed because we are missing this inclusive gender-focused lens, as we often don't do enough to design for disabled people, or for people of different ethnic minorities, of different age also, which is a very important element also when we're speaking about women, because my experience as a 30-something-year-old is not the same as a teenager, it's not the same as an elderly woman. So there are many coinciding factors. But for sure, it's also important to think about how the indirect consequences of not feeling safe while walking are also huge. So as I was saying before, access to work is a major issue. If your commute depends on walking, or even if it depends on public transport, your experiences on these modes make a difference. And we often see that women sometimes actually take longer routes to get to work, for example, so that they avoid certain areas, as Lily was mentioning from her experience. And this is added time. This is added time to your commute. This is an added burden that a woman would have to take in order to do the same thing that a man does. And this is also something that we have to, it shouldn't be the case, you know. Yeah, and also from research, we also know that women tend to trip chain, which is basically means that instead of doing like a one back and forth trip, they tend to do like multiple stops on the way, so go to different destinations. And so in a way, like the way that they move in the city is also different. And, you know, so they have even a greater burden in terms of the inequality of moving. And they also tend to take up the majority of care work in cities worldwide. So it's not just about them moving, but maybe moving with a stroller, with a baby, or taking care of an elderly person in the family. So yeah, there are I would say many economic, but also social consequences of women's limited mobility. That when you really start from a point where you are actually looking at the needs of different people across demographics, you start to see how big the impact of these small differences are. Lily, do you have any?
I think you covered most of it, to be honest. But yes, I mean, I completely agree on the fact that women are actually, economically speaking, basically holding up the economy, at least in Italy. Like the impact that unpaid care work has, I think, especially with like an ideal of traditional family that is very also
dominant,
quite alive in Italy. I think economically speaking, women have a huge impact, and not that I agree, obviously, with the system and how it works. Something else about not having women on the street because of the perception of being unsafe. I mean, it's interesting because actually violence against women mostly happens indoors. So like in their own homes. It's not something on the streets. It's very much related to a perception. And I think that this kind of violence that happens on the street also impacts other people apart from women, mostly actually. And so having, in general, I think having more heterogeneous group of people in squares, in streets, makes it more not just livable, but like a perception of living in a more inclusive society. So it really impacted me when I visited some urban spaces, and I would only see a certain group and category of people, because that's something that kind of happens. It's not necessarily even just men, but I mean, at nighttime, it's often the case. And that really kind of gives an impact, not only, I don't think, on women, but I think it impacts other men also, and it impacts different age groups, as Lamia was saying. And that kind of gives you an impression of like that space not belonging to you, also going back to who that space was made for. So I think the benefit of having different individualities within the same space is overall everyone's benefit. So yeah, that's really the only thing I could add.
Yeah, it's a complex it's a complex topic, but we're trying.
Yeah, no, definitely. You're doing a great job. But yeah, going back to also your points, also what Lily mentioned in the beginning, like as women, we know there are some parts of the city that we should not go to. There are hours within a day that we shouldn't go out. There are certain things that we shouldn't wear, and these are the things that have been taught to us, from a very young age to be safe or only feel safe within a city. Uh, but I'm curious to know what are some architectural elements, and also going back to your survey, that would affect this or impact this feeling of safety within a city, and how, like, maybe if certain neighborhoods were not feeling safe, what were some urban design or architectural elements that existed in those neighborhoods that would affect this feeling of safety or impact us not wanting to go to those neighborhoods at certain hours with a certain clothing, or whatever.
Lily, you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, this is something that we've been studying basically for the project through literature review, and there are many aspects that can impact. First of all, the perception of safety depends on the individual who is perceiving the space. So this is kind of like the premise. I will have a different perception compared to, I don't know, an elderly man who is only maybe visiting a neighborhood, whereas I maybe perhaps live in it. So let's start from the premise that everything kind of like also is reflecting the truth of each individual. However, space and architectural design do have an influence on the perception of safety. This has been studied in the prospect refugee theory. So whether the space permits you to have a vast overlook on everything that's around you, or whether you're in an enclosed space where people can see you but you can't see what is around you and who is around you, and also how space is being used and the traces of human behavior in that space. So we have the broken window theory. These are all aspects of urban space which influence someone's perception of safety in the space. Perception of safety, which then also influences the walkability. So obviously, walkability is based on the comfort that an area can give, the usefulness, the attractiveness, and then the safety. And that's kind of like what we were focusing on and what we've been focusing on for StepUp. So we decided to kind of like group these factors which influence safety into three main groups. So we have like spatial features, so like geometry of space. As I was saying, if you're in a tunnel, or if you're like in a very large area which is kind of desolate and there's no activities going on and there's no buildings, or if you are in a residential area and there's lots of windows, so hypothetically there are lots of people who could see you on the street or not. So these are spatial features. Then there is city use, which is, as I was saying, kind of like the traces of behavior of people who have been walking through that city, through that space, leaving. And we're talking about urban degradation. We're talking about litter also. We're talking about the presence of people and how that can influence, and what, obviously at that point there was kind of the problem of what do we mean by presence of people? Do we mean a heterogeneous group, like a mixed group of people, or do we mean just men, etc. And then the third group is hotspots, which is basically some points that hotspots, exactly, which are very recognizable, that are like hubs or transport hubs, or something that is recognizable and can be associated to something that makes you feel safe or unsafe. Even train stations would be hypothetically a hotspot. And through our data collection, we are trying to determine the relevance of these safety factors towards the perception of safety, and how they influence and how they don't influence, because obviously we also have how much lighting there is in an area, and that's so spatial features, how much can I see. So apart from how space is built, if obviously it's nighttime and it's completely dark, then it doesn't matter how the space is built. It just, it matters that there's lighting. So this is basically what the idea is, also through the survey that we've been doing, is listing all of these safety factors in these categories and asking people, what is relevant for you? So is lighting important, or could you just do without it? Or I don't know, is the presence of pubs or open at night, because we're now concentrating on Milan at night, so walkability in nighttime. And so how much the presence of other factors is relevant for people. I don't know if Lamia, you wanted to add something.
No, I think, it's exactly as you said. Yeah, there are, the literature revealed really, because we, in the beginning of the project, we had a extensive literature review looking at global scientific papers and reports, and really just trying to understand, based on the literature, which factors are the most commonly cited ones. And as Lily was saying, in a total, we had, I think, 18 or 19 safety factors that we identified as being influential. And these are grouped in, some are spatial features, obviously, this is the most, I'd say, directly modifiable element, right? Because this is, as architects and urban planners, this is what we can do. So, okay, we know that we need women need to walk in spaces where they feel like they can see everyone around, where there aren't barriers hiding their view, where there is proper lighting at night, maybe also some tools for emergency, like, for example, a place where you can call someone. Exits also is a very important spatial feature. So the ability to not walking in a dead-end road, for example, to have always the option to escape from several points, from different places. So these are all features, I think, which are directly actionable, let's say. These are can be easily addressed, especially when we talk about public space design. If it's already designed with these elements in mind, this completely changes already the perception of safety of women. And this is something we can really work on. City use is a bit more complicated, because then we're talking about, from one side, as Lily was mentioning, the state of the neighborhood or the state of the area in which you're walking. So we know also from the literature that if a space isn't well cared for, this also impacts the women's perception of safety. They don't feel safe in an area that's vandalized or littered, or that isn't well taken care of. So some elements that you don't necessarily connect with the perception of safety, but they have a direct impact. And then you have the hotspots, which are really they're interesting, because it's not specifically related to how the space is used or how it's designed, but it's really about in my head, I'm thinking, train station, unsafe, regardless of how it was designed or who is actually in the space. And this is really a tricky thing to deal with, because it's kind of in the collective, memory or collective consciousness of people walking in the city. We know that train stops, train stations, bus stops. I don't remember what else, but certain locations or destinations are already considered unsafe, and this is something that you kind of, I guess, need to work even more on to ensure that they give a sense of safety whichever time of day you have to use them or pass even in front of them. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, as you were saying, I was imagining and I was thinking, yeah, those are exactly places I don't feel safe. But I wanted to also ask you about the process that of your project and how you started and where you're thinking to go. Because I was thinking if some of the listeners in other cities they feel the same things, they see the same patterns in their cities, and they want to kind of start. Where do they start from, and what do you think would be a good process to go through, and of course what has been your process?
Shall I go? Let me do you want?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, first of all, we are basing our process on the analysis of data. I mean, it's very difficult to get gender-based data. So in general, there is a big gender data gap. However, we have the data from an app, which is called WearApp, which is an app created for women to be able to express their feeling of safety or unsafety by through geolocalization. So we have over 50,000 comments on the whole of the city of Milan, with specific indication of where exactly women feel safe, they feel in between, and they feel unsafe. Because the votes go from like 1 to 3, so it was designed to be obviously rather easy to use and simple, but there is a lot of data there that we can use. So that's kind of where it started, and where the process of data analysis started. We are also aware of the fact that apps are a very useful tool. However, there is a risk of creating bias. So obviously, most of the people, all of the people who've been using the app identify as women, first of all. And there is a very kind of like restricted age group that goes from like 18 to 35, more or less. So it's very important for us also to use a method which will permit us to analyze this data through, but with awareness. So without creating and giving it like, this is a universal data. No, it's not. But it is also a big amount of information, and it's important because of that. So our idea is we also have data, location-based data. So on the city of Milan, we have been contacting the municipality, not only the municipality, but also other agencies. And we have gathered a lot of data of the state of the city. So on the town, so the lighting, for example, which is relevant in this case, the presence of restaurants and pubs, so open from a certain hour to a certain hour. And the idea is to compare the WearApp data, which is kind of like one level on the city of, so imagining a map of the city of Milan, we have one level, which is the WearApp data, so the perception of safety. One layer is the location-based data, so actual physical features of the city and how they are disaggregated on the streets, and seeing whether there is a relationship between certain physical elements and the perception of safety that has been expressed by this group of women. So this is kind of where we are going and what we would like to achieve. This will happen through the use of the definition of safety factors. So what we did during the literature review was define these safety factors, through which we have selected a certain amount of location data. So if one of the safety factors is lighting, then I will consider one of the layers to be the presence of lighting in the city of Milan. Or if one of the safety factors is spaces of gathering, pubs and open activities, then I will consider the layer of activities open at night. In that way, we hope to achieve what the idea is to achieve the relevance and the weight that these factors have on the perception of safety, by putting these two layers in relationship between each other. Another process of data collection that we've also been doing is a survey. So we've got more than 1,700 responses, and the main one of the main parts of this survey was the fact that we wanted to actually have an intersectional approach to it. So as I was saying, the Where app data, the Where app in general, is quite biased, obviously, because, well, first of all, even just to have an app where you can express your perception of safety is already kind of like a bias. I have to be aware that there is an app that I can express that. I mean, it's a whole thing.
And the apps are usually also used by people of a certain age, which is again a bias related to this specific type of tool. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So what we did in our survey was we were really thorough in the demographic part of it. It was quite a long survey, but it was kind of the intention was to have an overview of who was answering. So like not only your perception of something, but also your background, your individuality. So what's the difference of perception between, as Lamia was saying, like a 70-year-old woman or a 30-year-old woman or a 18-year-old woman? Something that the app obviously can't give you, and also other databases can't give you, because the presence of segregated data by gender is almost impossible to achieve. This is one of the main problems. So what we're doing is kind of trying to use something that is biased, but we know is biased, but is also a big amount of data, and taking it down to the ground and seeing what it means, and also then being able to compare it to data which ideally gives us a way of reading it which isn't biased. And at the end, the idea is to have a weight of relevance of each safety factor. So that is kind of like the process that we're going through.
And to map it on, so to map like the collective result of this on the city of Milan, and be able to see like how the different factors influence different areas of the city.
Yeah, exactly. There's also the focus groups actually that I
So we have a lot of data collection levels. And I think, I mean, this is also, so going back to your question about like also how to, what you would recommend for people to do if they want to study this aspect. This is very much, as Lily was saying, related to what data you have in the city. And this changes drastically, especially if we're talking about gender. This changes drastically from one city to another. In Milan, we're lucky enough to have a good amount of information, like documented information, spatially, geographically about the city, that we can use at our disposal to understand different areas of the city, which is up to date also. That's another element. And we're also lucky to have the Where app, which is a tool to for women that women have already been using since I think 2018, is it, Lily, or in Milano, to rate how they feel in the city and pin it on the map. So this helps us also as urban planners to understand when they felt that way, where exactly it was, which street it was on, and so we get to combine this information of how the city is designed with who is using it and how they felt in that space. Which is, these are privileges. These are, I mean, you don't really have this everywhere. And I say this also based on my background from Cairo, because while I was working on my thesis, for example, the data is scarce. Like there is so little that you can actually understand in terms of gender. Maybe you have some information about safety in general, but knowing how it differs between men and women, this is much trickier to find. So I would say start from the gender data gap. See which information you already have disaggregated by gender, and see how much you can actually collect yourself, because you don't always have this space within a research project or even like a physical project, the space or time or resources to be able to collect enough data and enough first case like research that would be enough to understand the city well and to understand how gender plays a role in this information. So so I would say start from the gender data gap, and always using different sources of information, as Lily was mentioning, to be able to make sure that you aren't biased in a way, because each tool has its own bias. In general, in digital humanities, for example, you know that when you use online tools, the first thing that you risk is losing the responses from older people, which is very important and something that's also very overlooked in urban planning. So having a mix of different sources of data really gives you the opportunity to overlay all of this information together and have a more well-rounded and holistic reading of the city.
They're really great. I'm really excited for the results of your project and to see. And I also did the survey, and it was amazing.
Thank
it was
you.
very, very thorough. Yeah, it was great to see how much really effort you have put into making those questions. So I really appreciated it while doing the survey. Are you still are you still in the data collection phase? So can people still do the surveys? Yeah,
they can actually, yes.
It's still open. It's in the final phases.
Okay.
But yeah, for sure, if we have additional responses, this would definitely help. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I will put the link also of that in the video. But thinking about it, how to really solve this issue from the root. We know that, of course, design and policy is a really huge part of that. But there are very other huge elements like education, our culture, the patriarchy that we're facing. And of course, I mean, as important as the design elements are in the feeling of safety and the actual safety, they can have an impact, till a certain level. So I wanted to ask you more on a personal level, but also if you have any professional answer to that. What do you think are some of the conversations that we can have, not only as designers, but, as women or people who are interested in this kind of issues to make an improvement in this kind of issues in our families, in our workplaces, with a group of our friends, so we are not just only talking about food or football. That is a very important topic in Italian workplaces. But we, kind of use our time with the people around us to also try to, address this a little bit culturally. What are some questions that we can talk about? What are some topics that we can bring to our everyday kind of conversations from your point of view?
Lily, you have something?
Yeah, but I mean...
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, something that really, I already spoke about it, but I mean, I was quite surprised how, like in academia, in university, how little this conversation is had. I mean, I agree that it's a good thing. It's the first year that, so I'm following this master's called Gendered City, and it's the first year. It started in last February, and I think it's great. I mean, it's definitely a thing to be really happy about. But something that really hit me recently was because of the masters, I went back into my old courses, and something that hit me was how easily it's a given that the fact that we're talking about men most of the time, and that's not just with, you know, friends talking about football, which is very male-centered, although also there we're kind of like trying to open up to female football, which is great, but something that's just so eradicated that even women teaching, you know, architecture in academia aren't actually telling you this is happening. So you might even, you know, there is very little information on women architects, for example. It's very that they are coming up with studies about them and like researching them in archives now as we speak. So, you know, I understand it might be complicated to even just have an architect program which talks about the same amount of men and women. That's not what I'm saying right now. What I'm saying is, let's acknowledge this, because it's something that is just completely given. It's a given. Like you don't even question it at all. And I, as a person who I feel like I question things quite a bit, but when I realized that I had not even vaguely thought about it, and afterwards going back to it, I was just so angry and annoyed. And like, I think it's a conversation that needs to be had not only in courses about gender, but like in regular courses, because that's where, you know, if I'm following a course which is on gender studies and the gendered city, and it kind of like is a given that I already have that issue more or less in my mind beforehand. Or anyway, it is in like 80% of the cases. I think this acknowledgement needs to be had in like neutral spaces, which are never neutral, but anyway, in all spaces. That's kind of something that really got me angry after a while when I thought about it, about the academic space. So yeah, that's my thought about what we could do, what teachers could do.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, yeah, Lily makes a great point, because in response to your question, so if even in the academic community, you face issues and you're struggling to bring this issue to light, let alone conversations with friends, you know, in the workplace and everything else. So yeah, I agree with Lily that it starts there, really. It's about making sure that this bias is exposed in school and in architecture courses, urban planning courses, etc. But then also, and this would naturally let it flow into, you know, conversation, at least among peers, among architects who are aware of the issue. But going back to also, you mentioned the patriarchy and how this influences, how this plays a role. So definitely, this is something also that as architects we tend to overlook, because, for example, one of the main issues that are being critiqued now and criticized is the issue of the public-private dichotomy. And this is basically in feminist architecture. This is the concept that the public space was made for men and the private space was made for women. And this is like the thing that we've been, you know, even if you don't think about it so much, it's rooted in our psyche, and it really drives the way that we think and the way that we act in space. So like starting from there, just addressing the elephant in the room, you know, the public spaces for both and the private spaces for both. So yeah, this is just one of many ways in which we sort of tend to create like this binary of like, women are, I don't know, feelings and emotions, men are rational thinkers and you know, work and do serious things. So we have to really question like some of these patriarchal norms that we just live by and never really look at. Another issue is the issue of intersectionality, which Lily mentioned before, and is one of the things that in this project, really like the original points that we are really trying to tackle. And this is the concept that as a person, I am not just a woman. I'm a woman of a certain age, of a certain ethnic background, of a certain nationality, and so on. So there are many layers that make up how I'm perceived in space and how I act in space. And this is important because this means that my experience is very different from another woman of similar backgrounds, but who comes, I mean, where some elements are different, and the same applies to men and every gender. So, so this is also an important point that we don't really talk about, and it's tricky because there are so many elements involved. So, in general, in the literature, usually it's discussed in terms of race because it's one of the most important topics, but also in terms of age. And we really need to like look at these interconnections to be able to have a better understanding of how women experience, the city. And another point I wanted to make is about also the relationship. So talking about different population groups, for example, one of the points that we uncovered as important in terms of perceptions of safety is the presence of police, for example, or the presence of security personnel across the city. This also, there's a big difference depending on where you're from. So some population groups have a specific relationship to the police and to the idea of police being in the space that could actually hinder their perception of safety rather than improve it. And this is, of course, related to police violence and many like underlying issues. So I guess short answer. I would say start from really questioning the ideas that you grew up with from the very beginning, and how these impact space, how these impact cities, and how we live in them. And then from there you could start to understand a bit better how gender really plays a part in every single aspect of these issues.
I really agree with like everything that you said, and thank you because it was on the back of my mind, the police units and how we were considering them, like the connotation, whether it was going to be positive or negative, the fact that we couldn't give a connotation because that would have been a bias. Yeah. And something that came to my mind when you were talking about intersectionality is also how it's kind of like a discourse that has to start with recognizing one's privilege, and like how these axes intersect between one another, because we're also talking about economic status and how that actually has an influence, obviously. Yeah. And yes, it's all about basic questioning oneself also, and
questioning our own bias even as women. Because this tends to be forgotten, like you're saying, exactly, like where I come from, my well-being, my social status makes a huge difference. So I can't assume to have a universal experience. I can't just say that, because I'm a foreigner and so I have a negative experience. Sure. But then there are foreigners with, less means and who live in more precarious situations, more vulnerable situations, who have a very different and probably much worse experience walking around the city. So I think this is one of the tricky but also very important things to focus on, especially in research.
No, definitely. I agree with both of you. And I mean, in terms of, the thing that we didn't study anything about gender when we were studying architecture and urban design, but also like any other topic, like the way that we've been taught also about sustainability is very superficial about, so I always think how we can, make these conversations kind of more inclusive, and to also to talk to other people about it and make them aware of how their cities is really impacting them. And because you don't know anything until you know it, and so how can we really bring this to our also everyday conversations in a way to make it also more inclusive, and to also find creative ways to talk about it in a way that might not sound, as if we are, putting a part of population, we are questioning them, or not to create defensive mechanisms, but also like really how can we talk about these things in a creative way that it doesn't feel heavy, but we make the whole conversation also more inclusive, and we open it to more and more people. So because till you don't know it, you can't see it as also it happened to us, the way that we've been educated, and the moment you see it, you're like, oh my gosh,
you can't
this is affecting it. Yeah, exactly. So thank you to you both. I just want to wrap up with asking you a question about the impact that you wish your work would have on the world, let's say. So if you could dream big, either with this project or whatever you're doing with transport or your whole career, how would you see the city of Milan, let's say in 20 years? What would you wish the girls living in the city, going, walking in the city would feel? How would you wish, the impact of your work would have been? Dream big.
Lily, I see you smiling. Go ahead. I feel like you have something to say.
Well, regarding the project, I mean, what you were saying before about not creating the defense mechanism is probably one of the biggest wishes you can go for, because honestly, the acknowledgement of the problem, but also that, it's everyone's problem, and it's not, us versus you or whatever, I think is basically it. Because that is what we face on a daily basis, is, an interest in a topic taken by whoever is the, discriminated group. And I'm not only talking about, gender and, StepUp, and I'm talking about anything really, anything that has to do with access of privilege and discrimination based on them. So that's probably the best thing I could wish for through the project. And on this, and regarding the city, I mean, the wish would just for it not to be an issue anymore. Not just an issue as in, because safety is something that it's something that kind of like links everyone, and it's like an interest that everybody has when walking around the city. And for it to be influenced by gender, and the fact that if your gender influences your perception of safety, I think is something that we should just work towards eliminating. And I say that as in like, I mean, obviously, but even just going out in the evening without questioning and without thinking of, who am I going to call on my phone when I get back home, or like, do I keep my keys in my hand or stuff like that? It's just, that's kind of like something that would be amazing if it, stopped happening.
Definitely, yeah. I think we all agree on this point. So in my opinion about the project, ideally, I mean, we're figuring out a lot of things along the way. So the methodology is constantly being, questioned and changed to accommodate the data that we have, as we were saying before. So, and then obviously the results are the first thing that we care about, right? Like we want to we hope that by the end of the project, we're able to look at a map of Milano. Sorry, there's a bit of noise on the street. I hope it's not interrupting. So to be able to look at the map of Milano and see not just areas, the interest isn't like which parts of the city, or like, I don't know, 75% of the city is perceived as unsafe. This is really like, again, going back to what Lily was saying, is more of like the kind of negative narrative that we don't really want to buy into, but to actually make it transformative. And the idea is that by mapping areas of the city, understanding perceptions of safety, how they change within them relative to different factors of safety, helps us to understand the relationships better and to understand, like, for example, if we're talking about Milano, in Duomo, for example, if we could see that, let's say, the presence of people is a positive thing there. However, the presence of, I don't know, lighting is not so important. I doubt this, but I mean, just to give an example. Whereas in a completely different part of the city, let's say, I don't know, Quarto Giaro, you see that actually the presence of people is perceived as a negative thing when we, overlay the pieces of information. So then this would really be something that would be interesting, not just to stop there, but hopefully to be able to continue to research like these details and really like circling back to giving back tools to the academic community, to architects, to urbanists, to be able to see that how the city functions and the different layers that we need to take into account when we're designing a city or spaces, public spaces within the city. But then also the other outcome that is important with respect to the project is methodology. So as we were talking before, we are really trying to combine different sources of data in order to get a more holistic, a less biased view of the city. And I think this is one of the things that I would really be happy if we're able to not figure out an entire methodology. Of course, this changes from project to project, but give some insights into how the way that we structured the project helped us achieve our goals and helped us to understand the city better and understand women's issues within the city better. And then from a personal perspective, what I would like to see, what I would like to change, or like the vision for the future, I would say the first thing and the most important thing is to make the invisible visible. So to make this invisible problem that we're dealing with as women and that many people deal with more visible, and to understand, going back to your question before about how this needs to be a general conversation. It shouldn't be just restricted to academic circles or practitioners, or it needs to be something that we discuss at large with our friends, with our male friends, in order to really have an impact on how it's perceived in society and how, have this kind of ripple effect that would hopefully influence not just the architecture scene, but, people in different circles as well.
Can I follow up with that?
Yeah, of course.
Ideally, also something action-based would be nice, like a second project about actually putting stuff on the ground that from the results that we will hopefully obtain, actually figure out then something practical that we can also apply to, I don't know, a street, a space, but not even necessarily, but something that can actually, impact also practically, deliverability of certain areas or of people's lives. So that would also be very, that would be amazing.
Yeah, we hope, that this, if we are able to really pinpoint a specific area, a public space in the city that could really benefit from an upgrade, then for sure, as Lily is saying, this would be a, let's say, future endeavor. It's not potentially like part of this project, but a follow-up of the project. There are so many ways we could go with this. I mean, as Lily is saying, not just in research, but yeah, of course, to practically apply and find solutions and actually perform some interventions in the city that would improve the situation.
These are very exciting. I would be applying to be a part of the pilot.
We'll be calling you first.
Okay, we have it on camera. You have to call me. These are really great, and I really hope that throughout the course of your careers, you can both make the impacts that you wish for, and I'm sure you will. With the way that I have seen in just 1 hour how you work, I'm sure you're gonna get there. And thank you so much to both of you, Lamia and Lily. Is there anything else you want to share?
I just want to thank you and everyone who filled in the survey, because really this is a pivotal aspect of the project, and it's really, I mean, it's not easy, and sometimes dealing with these issues, even if it's just a 15-minute survey, it's not a light topic to deal with, and it's not so easy to think about everything separately when we don't really think about it in our in a very precise way in our everyday lives. So really thank you for everyone who gave us their input, because this, I think, will be a very critical factor in the analysis, and I hope that at some point we can also share results and start to see all these different pieces come together. So thanks.
Thank you, Lamia.
Absolutely, I absolutely agree with everything, and thanks for the great conversation, really.
Yeah thank you to you both. It was really interesting to listen to you, and I will go on and follow up with your work, and I'm going to be waiting for anything that comes from the side of your project. So thank you so much for joining us, and also thank to our listeners for staying till this part of the conversation. If you are interested in what you heard, please feel free to share your experiences in the comments. And also, if you are working on something similar to Lamia and Lily and their big group, I think feel free to reach out to them. And
yes, definitely.
I will put the links to their project website and also their other social media. And if you like the conversations in Design to Connect, please feel free to support in any way you want. Subscribe, follow in LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Spotify, and all those different channels. So thank you, Lamia and Lily, and thanks to all of our listeners, and talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.